There's usually a moment when you start to notice the pattern. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly, almost politely. You meet someone, and at first everything feels easy. Conversations flows, you listen, they open up just enough to make you feel close. There's chemistry, but also comfort. You feel grounded around each other. And somewhere along the way, you begin doing what you always do. You show up emotionally. You ask how they're really doing. You notice when something feels off. You create space for honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. At first, they seem relieved by that. They lean in. They tell you things they don't usually tell people. They say they feel understood, seen, safe. And for a while, it feels like connection is finally happening the way it's supposed to. But then something shifts. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough to feel it. Replies take longer, conversations stay lighter. The warmth you felt starts to thin out, like something quietly pulling away. And you start wondering when or how you became the one reaching. What's confusing is that nothing bad happened. No big argument, no obvious betrayal, just a slow emotional retreat. And the question forms almost automatically, why does this keep happening? Emotionally available people often don't realize how much their presence stands out. You're not just kind, you're not just empathetic, you're emotionally steady. You listen without trying to fix. You don't panic when emotions show up. You stay present when things get vulnerable. And to someone who spent a long time holding their emotions at arm's length, that feels rare. It feels calming. It feels like relief. Being around you lowers the noise inside them. They don't have to pretend as much. They don't have to keep everything contained. They can exhale a little. And that's where the connection begins. But relief isn't the same thing as readiness. What feels safe at first can start to feel exposing later. Because the closer someone gets to you, the harder it becomes to avoid themselves. There's a moment, usually subtle, when the emotional closeness stops feeling comforting and starts feeling demanding. Not because you asked for more, not because you changed, but because intimacy has a way of turning the volume up. Being close to someone emotionally means being seen. It means being known. It means being expected to show up and not just when it's easy, but when it matters. And for someone who's learned to survive by staying guarded, that can feel like pressure. So they do what they've always done. They pull back. They create distance where there used to be closeness. They become harder to read. They stay physically present but emotionally vague. And you ask, what's wrong? They struggle to answer. Not because they don't care, but because they don't fully understand what's happening inside themselves. From your side, it feels confusing. You didn't ask for perfection. You didn't demand anything unreasonable. You just stayed open. And somehow that openness became the thing that created distance. Emotionally available people often become emotional anchors without realizing it. You notice shifts. You hold conversations together. You offer reassurance when uncertainty shows up. You don't do this because you're trying to carry the relationship. You do it because it feels natural. Because you believe connection grows through understanding, through staying. But over time, the balance changes. You're leaning in, they're leaning away, and you start doing more emotional work. Not because you want to, but because the alternative feels like losing the connection altogether. So you give things time. You stay patient. You tell yourself that closeness can be scary, that people move at different speeds, that maybe this is just a phase. And sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes what you're experiencing isn't a temporary hesitation, it's someone reaching the edge of their emotional capacity. What's rarely talked about is how painful this dynamic is for emotionally available people. Because it doesn't end with anger, it ends with self doubt. You start replaying conversations, wondering if you said too much, if you needed less, if you should have waited longer to be honest. You shrink parts of yourself without meaning to. And the most frustrating part is that connection felt real because it was. The connection wasn't imagined. It just wasn't sustainable in the way you hoped. Eventually, something becomes clear. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a quiet realization that being emotionally available doesn't guarantee emotional reciprocity. Some people are drawn to depth, but struggle to stay there. And that safety without consistency slowly turns into exhaustion. This isn't about being too open. It's not about needing less. It's not about changing who you are. It's about recognizing the difference between someone who feels comforted by your presence and someone who can actually meet you in it. Because real connection doesn't leave you guessing. It doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much when you're asking for something mutual. And clarity often arrives when you stop trying to understand why someone couldn't show up and start noticing how often you did. This story may be familiar. Maybe it brought someone to mind, or maybe it brought you back to a version of yourself who tried a little harder than you should have. If so, you're not alone. You're not broken. You're not naive. You're just emotionally present in a world where not everyone knows how to be. And sometimes recognizing the pattern is the beginning of choosing something different. If this resonated, you're not broken, you're becoming aware. And awareness is where change starts. If this puts words to something you felt but never quite explained, you're not alone. You can share this with someone who might relate, or subscribe if you want more clarity around emotions and relationships.